Can I request you all to please come and sit here? I'm not going to eat you, I promise. There are plenty of open chairs. So, my name is Mohit Thatte. I'm going to talk about this fancily named thing called DevOps. And I'm going to make a point that it's a philosophy. It's a bunch of practices, techniques, things that are probably going to be very useful to us all in our lives. And it's definitely not a buzzword. So we will see what I mean by that. The cover picture is an awesome book by Murakami. It's called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. So he's a marathon runner and he's also an author, pretty famous author. And this entire book is about his experiences with running. So this talk is kind of about my opinions and my experiences with DevOps. But this I'll just skip. Since the name of this event is Tech Jam, I don't want this to be about my opinions and my experiences. Okay. How many of you here are musicians? How many of you play an instrument or know a musician? Guitar, flute, right? When musicians say we are going to jam, does it mean one guy stands up and plays the guitar and then everyone goes home? No, right? It means that we all sit together, we create something together, we create value together, right? So my selfish motive of coming here is I want to learn from you rather than I stand here and tell you something. I'm interested in how you use these things in your day-to-day work. I'm interested to learn what the community is doing. So let's jam, talk to me, ask me questions, answer the questions that I put up. Don't be shy. Everyone has value to add to this conversation. When people say DevOps, usually this is my reaction. Whenever I ask someone what does DevOps mean, I get a different answer. So there are as many definitions of DevOps as there are probably people in this room. Can we agree on a common definition? What does this term mean? It's kind of like agile, right? Like people said, we do agile, we are this, we are that. But what do you mean when you say that? What do you actually do? Right? So what do we talk about when we talk about DevOps? That's kind of the link back to the book cover. Just a quick note on what a buzzword is. So a buzzword is a phrase or an item of jargon that is fashionable at a particular time and then it drops off. Or it kind of becomes a part of the language. Wikipedia actually has a list of buzzwords. Interestingly, startup is a buzzword. This is why when I'm introducing myself, I never say that I run a startup, I run a small business. Cloud computing is a buzzword. What does it mean? I do cloud computing. What does that mean? It doesn't mean much, right? Do you do containerization? Do you deploy your stuff in the cloud? Do you have automated provisioning? What does it mean? It can mean so many things. So let's talk about DevOps at a more deeper level. Can you read? The colors are a little off. Yes, I can't do much about that. So brief history of DevOps. Okay, there's a really nice video by Damon Edwards on YouTube. You can look it up. He's done like a 10-minute history of how this word came up. So Patrick Dubois and Andrew Clay Schaefer, these are two guys who are DevOps people, let's just say. Way back in 2008, there was an Agile conference, and I think Andrew proposed a session called Agile Infrastructure. Okay, so they were saying that here we have all these Agile practices. We're using them in dev, but can we also use them in our infrastructure? And nobody showed up to that session except Patrick. And Andrew himself didn't show up to that session because he got such bad feedback about the topic itself, because people were like, how can you have Agile infrastructure? And so back in 2008, okay, AWS wasn't such a big deal, Docker wasn't such a big deal, Chef and Puppet did not exist. So, times were different. But Patrick had this feeling in his mind that we can go there, we can get there. So nothing came out of that conference. Then also on Hammond talked about their work at Flickr, where they did 10 plus deploys per day. Okay, so Flickr is this huge site which is serving up pictures to millions of viewers, and they are deploying code 10 plus times every day into production. So this is the time when I think a lot of these practices came out into the open. There are these big internet companies that are doing stuff like this, and now they are talking about it. Then Patrick tweets saying that I wish I was at this conference. There are some great ideas there. And somebody replies to him saying, why don't you do the conference yourself? He's in Europe, he's based in Europe. So he says, okay, let's do it. So in 2009, he proposes a DevOps Days, which is the first conference which used the term DevOps. It starts trending on Twitter as hashtag DevOps. And it literally is a combination of dev plus ops. Okay. And that's where this word literally came into being. So trending on Twitter, and then if you do a Google trend search, you can see around 2009, it's just a spike like that. Have you guys heard about the hype cycle? So Gartner, have you heard about Gartner? It is an international, I guess it's a consulting firm, I'm not sure what to call it, but they produce reports on various industries. And one of their interesting outputs is the hype cycle. So when something new comes out, when something innovative comes out, right, it goes through this spike of interest. So there is a technology trigger. Then there is a peak of inflated expectations. People think that this is going to solve all our problems. VC money starts coming in, blah, blah, blah. They start getting a lot of press on TechCrunch and YC and Twitter, and everyone goes crazy about it. And then there is a trough of disillusionment. Oh, this is not going to solve all our problems. And then people realize, but this does add some value. And then they find what is that value, right? Where does this innovation fit in our scheme of things? And I think today, in 2015 or almost 2016, DevOps is in that part of the hype cycle. It's seen adoption. It actually means something to a lot of people. If you go on a lot of job posting sites, you will see DevOps as a requirement in job descriptions. So definitely, it's become a part of the mainstream. But I'm still not sure what people mean when they say DevOps. So continuing the conversation. So here's my opinions. Okay, this is a talk that I had done before at RootConf, and I'm just going to share some of these things with you. These are my interpretations of what DevOps can be, and this applies equally to you, whether you are a business analyst, a quality analyst, a developer, anything. So I think DevOps has a lot to learn from sports teams. So the first question I like to ask is, what do sports teams spend most of their time doing? What do you guys think? Practice, right? So sports teams spend most of their time in training. Probably 75% of their time, and only 25% of their time in play. Now compare that with a software team or a team that produces software. How much percentage of our time do we spend in training? In continuously improving ourselves, in learning new skills, in dedicating some time to, say, learning something new? Very little, right? So this is lesson number one. I think continuous improvement of your software product, continuous improvement of your software processes, continuous improvement of yourself is one of the major aspects of DevOps. And how do you do this? You do this with deliberate practice. So there is some research that has been done by social scientists about how people who are experts in their fields, like chess grandmasters, or say piano virtuosos, or the best anything in the world, how do they get there? They get there by deliberate practice. So what deliberate practice means is that you set small goals for yourself and you continuously improve against those goals. And you measure, you get feedback. It's not enough to say I improve. Someone else has to say you improve. And that's how you slowly get better at things. So deliberate practice, I think, is again a very important part of adopting this DevOps as a philosophy. In the Japanese tradition, so I've put this picture of Kung Fu monks, Shaolin Kung Fu monks. The meaning of the word Kung Fu, it's not what Jackie Chan does. It's not just fighting. It actually means practice of anything to gain expertise. So you can have Kung Fu in, say, programming. You can have Kung Fu in chess, right? It just means that you spend intense levels of practice at improving yourself, and you want to get to a level of perfection. So that's something we can learn from, right? Another interesting idea from the Japanese culture is the 3 levels of learning. It's called the Shu-Ha-Ri model. In this model, it says that a student has 3 stages. In the shoe stage, a student should just obey or should just copy the master. He should not question. Just copy and try to do exactly what the master is doing. That would, you would call it a novice, maybe. In the ha stage, things start to become second nature to you. You don't have to think. Right? Let's say you are learning some kind of text editor. The shortcuts are now natural to you. You don't have to look at the keyboard or anything. Now you start asking questions that how can I improve? How can I do this better? Why am I doing it this way? Why not that way? Right? In the ha stage, you learn to ask good questions. And then after a few iterations of that, you go to the re stage where you transcend all these things and you start innovating. And by that, I mean that you now start finding answers to your own questions. Right? How can I do this better? Can I write my own keyboard shortcuts for this IDE? Can I use a better IDE itself? Is my workflow broken? Right? Can I do a better workflow? So this is the restage. So I think, again, what I'm trying to say is that in sports teams, for example, from a very young age, people start going through this. Right? Like take football academies. Kids who are like 5, 6 years old start going there. By the time they're 15 or 16, they are considered ready for proper professional level soccer. So what's the analogy in our world? Right? Where do we go to become better? Where do we go through that grinder of regular deliberate practice? I don't know. I think this is an open question. The second thing about sports teams and DevOps is measurement. Okay, so a very, very important pillar of the DevOps philosophy is measure what you do so that you can objectively improve. Meaning what? That let's say I want to make my page load faster. I need to know how fast my page loads to begin with. Right? That's the simplest explanation. This here is a picture of Grafana. Have you guys heard of Grafana? Okay, so Grafana is a visualization dashboard for time series data. Your systems, a lot of software systems will generate a lot of data points that can be graphed over time. And then you can do zooming and panning and doing analysis on those time series data. So Grafana is an open source software which you can put on top of a time series database, which is Graphite or InfluxDB, or there are a number of them. And you can visualize what is happening in your system. Right? So again, what should we learn is that while we can measure many things, why do we measure? That's the more important question, right? So the DevOps philosophy, I think the important thing is Dev plus Ops. The Dev part is Grafana, right? It's the tools, it's what we use to actually implement things. But what is the Ops part? What does that mean? So I think what the Ops part means is, can we as developers be closer to the business? Can we speak the language of the business? Can I ask a business person, hey, what metric would you like to measure to see whether the business is doing better? Right? When we build a new feature, or say when your boss tells you to build a new feature, you should say why. What value does it add to the business? What value does it add to the end customer? And if we can start measuring those things, then I think we have won. Right? So sports people are obsessive about measuring things. Like, for example, take long distance runners. They are obsessive about their nutrition. How many percent am I getting from carbs, from proteins, from fats? At what point in the race should I be taking my supplements? All those things. They are obsessive about these numbers. What is my VO2 max? What are my per kilometer splits? So these numbers are useful to them because they help them run the race better. Similarly, as developers, we can measure any number of things. Right from your page load time down to you can run strace inside your Linux process and you can measure how much time function calls are taking. Right? You can be very granular and you can be very aggregated. But what is valuable? I think that's a business question. Right? And that's where the DevOps philosophy says that business and development need to collaborate to define these things. So if you can define with intent that this is useful to measure, then the devs can go and say, okay, let's measure it this way. Make sense? All right. This is my favorite. I think DevOps is very much like total football. Have you guys heard about total football? Anyone? Okay. So total football was actually, why don't you tell us a little about what you know about total football?
Actually, everyone in the team is kind of expert in football, and they play kind of short passes, like not long ball kind of thing. They pass the ball in kind of short passes, and they form kind of different shapes. There are different shapes actually, like diamond, triangle, and those kind of shapes. And the opponent team will be kind of very much confused whom to guard. So that is.
So just to paraphrase again, in football, typically the strategy used to be you are a defender, you are a midfielder, you are an attacker, and then you used to stay in your part of the pitch. In the 1970s, there was a coach from the Netherlands who said that let's break this strategy. Let's have 10 really fit people who can run the length of the pitch. And let's break the rules and say nobody is fixed. Everybody is an all-rounder, right? Think of it like the New Zealand team of maybe the 96 World Cup, I think, where pretty much everybody could bat and bowl. And that team made it to the semi-final. There is not a single superstar in the team, but everybody does everything, right? So the Dutch team had one superstar, his name was Johan Cruyff. The team was kind of made around him because he was an excellent finisher, just like the Barcelona team is structured around Messi. So why does Messi score so many goals? It's because the entire team gets the ball there in the first place, right? So the idea in total football is saying that you are no longer going to play one role. You are no longer just an attacker, just a defender, just a midfielder. Anybody can play any role. And if you leave your position, somebody else will come and take your position. So don't worry, go for it. So DevOps is saying something very similar. It's saying break down the wall between dev, BA, QA, system administrator, site reliability engineer, release manager. Why do you want so many roles? Right? Why can't people own their stuff? If I'm a developer, if I'm writing code, it's my responsibility to make sure that there are no bugs in it. It's not that I hand it off to the QA and say that abhi uski zimmedari hai. If you didn't find bugs, it's not my problem. Right? In the end, we all want that the customer gets value. The customer never sees bugs. The site never goes down. Right? We all agree on that. But whose job is it? It's everyone's job. So what the DevOps philosophy is saying is break down the silos. Don't have a separate dev team, a separate QA team, a separate BA team, a separate ops team. There are tools in place to do this, right? Like TDD, test-driven development, behavior-driven development have taken off. There are amazing tools out there which let you write tests with ease. So you don't have to hand off to a QA and tell them to do some manual testing every time. You can just automate the process, right? Similarly with operations, deploying your code should be a one-click process. You should not have to give it to somebody else or send a mail saying, please release from this branch, etc., etc. That release should be a no-op, like it shouldn't be a thing, right? So that's what total football and DevOps is about. Finally, I think DevOps talks a lot about empathy. So this person in the picture, his name is Scott Jurek. He's an ultra marathon runner. Ultra marathons are any races that are greater than 42 kilometers. Now this guy is the world's best ultra marathoner. He routinely does races of 100 miles, meaning Bombay to Pune, routinely. And his record, I think, is 160 miles in 24 hours. But that's not what makes him special. As you can see, the title of the slide is empathy, right? So what Scott Jurek does is he finishes the race and he usually comes first or second. And then he waits there and he cheers on the rest of the people. He makes sure everybody finishes the race. Why is this important? If you have ever run a long distance race, you will know that you get a lot of energy from people cheering you on. But even more than spectators, you get the maximum energy from your co-runners cheering you on. So this empathy is super important in our day-to-day lives, in our day-to-day jobs, I think. It's even more important to be empathetic towards somebody else's role, right? For example, at my last job, I was a developer, but I was also on call for 1 week in a month. On call means I'm the first point of support. If something happens, site goes down, people will call me. And I got woken up 2 or 3 times when people from the US would call at 2 a.m. and say site Thatte. Right? What happened after this is I became way more responsible about my own code. I started thinking a lot more before pushing things into production. Why? Because I know the pain that I'm putting others through, right? Because for the next 3 weeks, somebody else is on call. So now I want the whole team to be more empathetic, or the whole team itself has felt the pain. So they want to be more empathetic. They want to own their stuff. They don't want bugs in production, right? So this is an idea for everyone. Maybe spend a week playing a different role. Suppose you are a developer, try playing the role of a business analyst. You will see that business analysts have a really hard time because speccing out a feature is a very non-trivial task. You have to do a lot of trade-offs. It's not easy at all. You know, developers often have this kind of eyebrow attitude saying BAs kuch nahi karte. But that's not true. BAs do a lot. Vice versa, right? BAs might have this thing that developers have too much drama. They take too long to deliver things. But hey, try doing it for a week and you'll see why. So that's an idea. Empathy. So two things, right? Two questions are important. When you take dev plus ops, I think the dev aspect of it talks about how do you get things done. But the ops aspect of it is more about asking the question of why are we even doing this? It's about talking to your business stakeholders. It's about understanding how does my product add value to the end customer? And how does my job in the whole scheme of things contribute to that value, right? Okay, I have a few more specific questions, but just a quick poll. How many of you are devs here? So about half. This thing is dead. So we are about halfway through. I just wanted to get a feel for, are people finding this valuable? Should we change the format or should we continue? Anything in particular you would like to hear about in the space of DevOps? Because so far I've been pretty abstract and that's kind of intentional because I didn't know who the audience would be. So if you can, if you have any specific points you'd like to know about, any specific technologies you'd like to know about, just tell me and we'll talk about that. All right? Okay. So we talked about 4 different things that we can learn from sports teams, right? So just to summarize, right? One important thing is continuous improvement. This continuous improvement is at a personal level, at a product level, at a process level. It's at all levels. How do you do continuous improvement, say at a process level? You use automation. You use better tools, right? You study what's out there in the world. What are the open source tools that are available and you bring them into your workplace. We talked about deliberate practice, right? Which is setting goals for yourself and improving on them. Like, what's your New Year's resolution going to be? Are you going to learn a new programming language, maybe? A different kind of language, maybe, right? We talked about measuring things. Not just about how to measure, but what to measure and why to measure. All these things are important. We talked about total football, meaning breaking down silos. This is more about org structure, right? How should you structure your team so that you are most productive? Then we talked about empathy. That yes, people are playing different roles, but each role is challenging in its own way. Everybody is fighting their own battles. So have some empathy towards them. Now we'll move on to a little more tech stuff. This is more concrete. So how many people have heard the term continuous delivery? Okay. What about continuous integration and continuous deployment and continuous X? Okay, there are many continuous things out there. Let's talk about each of them, okay? First, let's talk about continuous integration. So, at least for the devs, this is a question for the devs. Do you commit code to master every day? Let's do a poll. How many devs in the room? How many commit code to master every day? Okay. Do you have a solid suite of automated tests to ensure that there are no bugs? Keep your hands up if you are committing to master every day. Now, keep your hands up if you have a solid suite of automated tests. Okay. If something breaks, can you fix it within 10 to 20 minutes? Is it your highest priority? Okay, great. So this means that you get the feedback that something is broken, you are able to fix it, and you are able to push the fix all within 10 to 20 minutes. Right? If you are doing all these things, yes. Yes, that's the question. Can you fix the build, not your production? Hopefully the break hasn't reached production yet. So the question is more around whether your continuous integration server caught something and you are able to fix it and you're able to push it all within 15 to 20 minutes, and whether it's your highest priority. Whether everyone on your team is taking your case, you broke the build, you should fix it now. Right? If you are doing all these things, then and only then you are doing continuous integration. Okay? Do you automatically deploy code to production at every commit? To master, I should add, not on your branches. How many people are doing this? No, right? This is kind of scary, I know. But Facebook, GitHub, big companies are pioneering this. It's called testing in production. So it's essentially a way of running experiments, right? So the mindset is that let's release this feature to 1% of our users. Now, if you have 100 million users, then 1% is still a big number. But let's release this feature to 1%. Let's see what happens in production. If we get good metrics, meaning people are using the feature a lot, or some metric that we want to track has trended upwards, then let's release it to everyone. So this is actually happening right now. But a lot of people, so the question really is, do you have the ability to do this? Right? Do you have the ability to set up a system where I can make a commit and it goes straight to production? It's pretty important. That would be continuous deployment. The distinction between continuous deployment and continuous delivery is that word that's highlighted in pink. Does the business care to deploy this feature to production? Right? Do you see the difference between the how and the why? That's all it is. So you can have a setup where you have one-click deploys, but that doesn't mean that you deploy everything. That's all that it's saying. But I think it's also saying that you should be measuring what you deploy. Maybe you should be doing experiments in production. You should be doing all this. Have people played with the GitHub releases feature? Okay, are people using GitHub? Okay, how many of you use Circle CI? CI servers, Travis CI, Circle CI, Snap CI. Okay, so Circle is similar to Travis. I recently set up a system where on GitHub you create a release and that automatically triggers a deploy to production via Circle. So Circle has these really amazing webhooks which are integrated with GitHub Actions. So if you create a release, you have to just give it a name, which is usually a tag, and then you have to write release notes. All that it does is it creates a Git tag, annotated tag, and it pushes it. And it also creates a notification to whoever is subscribed. Now, if Circle is a subscriber, it will get that notification and it will trigger something. And that something can just be deployed to production. So that's how we are currently deploying to production. Anybody on the team can create a GitHub release, and that's all it takes. The production system gets updated. So it is continuous delivery in the sense that currently the business doesn't really care. They are like, yes, deploy everything, because it's a small team. I'm talking about a startup of 4 to 5 people. So the business actually wants all the features delivered yesterday. So if you deliver it today, they'll be more than happy. But in bigger organizations, you might have different challenges. So just putting that out there. We saw that hype cycle, right? An important part of anything becoming mainstream is the tooling and ecosystem that develops around it. So I think DevOps has sparked off an entire industry pretty much, or let's just call this industry the DevOps industry, right? Or the cloud computing industry or whatever. But Amazon Web Services, Rackspace, there are so many hosting providers out there. They have such amazing APIs, which allow you to automate everything. You have Chef, Ansible, Puppet, which are technologies that allow you to maintain your infrastructure as code. Have people played with these? Yeah, they're pretty cool, right? I mean, configuration management is no longer a pain. What version of Nginx are we using in production? I'll just open my Chef file and tell you. What version of Postgres are we using in production? I'll just open my Chef file and tell you. Do we want to do an update to Postgres? Okay, change 9.3 to 9.4, commit, done. All the agents will update themselves, right? So essentially, the state of the art has moved forward. The sysadmin role, which was a very manual role, well, manual only in the sense that people actually knew a lot of detail about what was on the machine, has now been extracted from people's head onto code. Yes, it was possible to do this with bash scripts 30 years ago, but bash is not the prettiest language to maintain over time. So these are essentially DSMs that let you maintain your infrastructure as code. They are much easier to maintain than bash, is all I would say. There are tools to help our workflows, right? I just talked about there's GitHub, Circle CI, there's Jenkins over there in the right corner, Travis CI, Snap CI. So many hosted continuous integration platforms. You don't even have to do it yourself. You don't even have to set up a Jenkins server. Just buy a plan of Circle. Even the free plan is pretty good. And it figures things out for you. I mean, my mind is blown at how awesome these things are and how easy it is to get up and running with a continuous deployment infrastructure on Amazon. It doesn't take any time, right? I'm guessing you all agree with me. So the point I'm trying to make here is the state of the art has shifted drastically. Right? People out there are deploying tens of times every day, and it's not considered a big deal at all. So what are you guys doing? How many times do you deploy on average? Are there release cycles? Are there, say, bi-weekly, weekly, monthly, 6 monthly? What's the cadence? Anyone? Sorry? Once in 2 weeks. So I guess pretty much every team now has a cadence, right? We have a release bus that we have to catch. 2 हफ्ते में काम नहीं हुआ तो मेरा बस निकल गया, right? But if you're releasing once in 2 weeks and your competitor is releasing twice every day, who's going to find product market fit faster? And I'm talking here, so I think I'm a little biased. I come at this from a very startup-y perspective. I think established organizations have different problems to deal with, and I don't really have that much experience in established organizations. But if I'm a startup and I'm releasing once every 2 weeks and my competitor is releasing 10 times every day, who do you think is going to find product market fit faster? And by product market fit, I mean that you meet 5 customers, they give you 5 new ideas. मेरे को ये feature चाहिए, मेरे को ये feature चाहिए, कल check दे दूँगा. That's the kind of thing that happens in startups, right? Then you have to come home and implement the damn thing. Now, if you are going to tell him कि 2 हफ्ते बाद मिलेगा, then he'll be like, okay, whatever. Your other guy is giving it to me tomorrow, or he already has it. You know what I'm saying? So speed is of the essence. Having the ability to quickly, with confidence, release regularly is of the essence. And a lot of companies do this. And companies at the scale of Facebook and GitHub do this. So we should ask ourselves, why can't we? Sometimes it's a practical choice not to. Even if we can, we will not do it. But the question is, do we have the capability in-house? Someday, if we need to, if we are launching a new product in the market, do we have the ability? That's a question worth asking. So takeaways is actually something I would have liked everyone to share. Like, what did you take away from this talk? I've written some stuff down and I'll go through it. But I'm more interested in what people took away and any questions that you might have. Right? Let's actually start jamming now. Enough of me talking. So questions, feedback, anything. I guess most of you are from ideas itself, right? So what's your experience of a larger organization, right? I mean, the startup which I'm working with currently has 5 developers. I'm guessing there are 500 in ideas. Or 250. Okay, still 10x more. So how is it different? Do you like which of these practices do you all follow? Which of these you all think are useful, which are not useful? Come on, people talk.
Continuous integration definitely. Continuous delivery, that necessary. Continuous delivery is a challenge.
Okay. But is it valuable as a business? Do you have customers who are demanding things every day? So I guess you don't really need it. That's why it's not a priority.
This is going to change my
Okay.
like let's say kind of business that we are into. So we need to industry. The industry is not fast enough for them to adapt to changes.
Right.
And there are good of big customers. And they have to have their training sessions. That becomes a challenge.
So this is a very interesting insight. I think there is a demand side problem for change management and a supply side problem. Right? All that we have spoken about is supply side. If the customer is demanding change, we can easily give it. But if the customer says, "मेरे को training चाहिए, I'm going to need 5 weeks of lead time," then it's a totally different challenge. Do you actually have different versions of the software for different customers? Everyone has the same version. But that's a very interesting perspective.
I mean, companies like let's say Facebook or let's say I don't know how critical their softwares are.
Right.
Critical their softwares are from business point of view. So if they use a bug or if they deliver something, I don't know how many people are going to come in with Facebook or YouTube. We are into a business of analytics and optimize, but if things go wrong, we need to use them. So it becomes difficult for us to actually run.
So another very interesting perspective, how critical is your software? I want to address that actually. So one thing I would say is if Facebook introduces a bug in its ad platform, they will lose money. And every minute that they are down, they will lose in the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I would not say it is not critical. There are components in Facebook that are very critical. Right? Similarly for Google or say an ad network, there are components that are very critical. If you're not serving up ads, you're not making revenue. So how does Facebook get the confidence to deploy in spite of the criticalness of the mission? That's the more interesting question. Right? So maybe can we have statically typed languages? Maybe we want to move to Haskell or something. Everything is mathematically proven before you deliver it. I don't know. Like there are so many ideas out there, but I'm just trying to say that I think there are all the software in the world that has users is critical in some sense. Yes, users won't complain too much if Facebook is down, but stockholders certainly will, shareholders certainly will. So, but that's an interesting perspective. There are some companies who care more about the how do you say this, the mission criticalness of their software than others. And so maybe their processes are a little more, I don't know how to put this, they are a little more slow perhaps, or a little more careful. I don't know. One interesting point that I was trying to make is ownership, right? So whose responsibility is it to deliver the code? Let's say you are building mission critical software. You have a team of 50 developers. You also have a release manager. You also have a QA lead. You also have a site reliability engineer or something of that sort. Whose responsibility is? Where does the buck stop? How does it work? Every individual, right? And so, I mean, I would personally think that if every individual really takes ownership, if they really care, then it should just fix the problem if there is one, right at the root. But in terms of tools, automated testing, compile and checking, all these things would help. Anything else? I come from Barclays, an investment bank. So we have a nice tool called Rolio. It's a one-click deployment tool. And surprisingly, the motivation to go for that tool was cost cutting. So we had a legacy deployment tool which was written by Barclays team itself around 10 years back. And people who had developed it and maintained it won to our competitors. And the people who are maintaining now, they have no idea how to touch it and stuff. And what they did was they bought a new tool from this company called Computer Associates. So these are the guys who wrote processes and so many other tools, So because of using Nolio now, every team knows, how things work, how things are deployed, and everything. Even as developers, we know how to deploy it in production, just that we don't have the rights to do it. So it is that simple. And once they migrated all this to Nolio, they started cost cutting in terms of resources. So deployment people slowly started, deployment department slowly started decreasing its idea. Thanks for that perspective. I think so. Mark Andreessen says software is eating the world, right? It is the first thing that software is going to eat is us. We are essentially coding our way into oblivion. So there will be software that does everything, which means our jobs are redundant, essentially. So, but yeah.
Companies are going for this companies who are not doing full to their companies delivery. So one of the companies like a downtime. Let's say I want to deploy some shared resources. So there is clearly problem that how to minimize the downtime and that. So that's the scary part where customer time fails.
So the question is around zero downtime deployments, essentially. Right? So if you have mission critical software and you want to deploy an update without bringing anything down, how do you do it? So there are some strategies that people are using out there. Blue-green deploys you might have heard of. Immutable infrastructure is a popular term these days. So essentially they are saying that you create a VM and you run a version of the software on it. And then when you want to do an upgrade, you throw away that VM and you create a brand new one. So essentially, the idea is that you create your entire stack and then you just switch over your load balancer to the newly provisioned stack. And the stack creation is automated by code. So if you're in AWS, there is something called CloudFormation. You can use Chef and Puppet and Ansible. All these tools are available. But essentially, you create a clone of your stack with the new version of the code. And then you just switch at the load balancer. In fact, Amazon has this thing called Elastic Beanstalk. Have you heard about it? So Elastic Beanstalk actually offers atomic switchover. So when you do an update in Elastic Beanstalk, it handles the blue-green for you. But you don't have control over how Ruby is installed, how things are installed inside the machine. So Amazon controls the machines entirely. But it's an out-of-the-box blue-green deploy solution that Amazon gives for free. They only charge you for the resources that are actually used. So the EC2 instances, the Elastic IPs, whatever.
How do you manage the changing data that you are doing?
So you don't. I mean, essentially, the databases or the data stores have to be shared. So how do you do blue-green deploys for databases is itself a specialized topic. So, for example, I can tell you about Postgres at least. In Postgres, what you have is a data directory, which is mentioned in the config file. So as long as you can mount that on multiple instances, right? Say, let's say you use NFS or something, then all the instances of Postgres are going to use the same data directory. So you can bring up a whole new Postgres cluster, which is pointing to the same data directory. And it will see all the latest data as soon as you switch. So I think, so essentially shared global data is always a problem in any context. Even inside your programs, shared global mutable state is always a problem. Right? That's what the functional programming people are talking so much about. That just avoid shared mutable state. But your database is by definition shared global data. So you can't run away from it. There are other interesting things like CQRS in the mix where people are talking about append-only data. And your databases are just views on that data. So your writes are just appends. So things like Kafka, for example, which you might not have heard about, but Kafka is a relatively new message queue system, which is append only. And clients are responsible for maintaining counts. Like I have read so many messages. Now give me the next one, give me the next one. So it's very highly available and things like that. But the idea is that all your writes are just appends. They don't overwrite anything. So your data is never overwritten, it is just appended, and then the reads have to be basically views on top of those logs. But yeah, topic for a different day. Any other questions? So the question is, there are so many options for automating your infrastructure. AWS gives their own options: Elastic Beanstalk, Opsworks, Cloud Formation. You can write your own recipes with Chef, Puppet, Ansible. Which one should you use? I think it really depends on. Okay, this is a very consultant answer. It depends. But my experience is okay. So currently, I'm working with a very small startup. We have 4 people on the dev team. There are nobody who specializes in DevOps. So the way we have done it is we have created snapshots of virtual machines with all the versions of the software installed on them already. And we just launched 10 instances based on a snapshot. So we have 0 Chef, 0 Puppet, 0 Opsworks, 0 anything. I think this is the leanest way to get started. But it's not going to scale. As soon as I start doing auto-scaling groups, as soon as I start doing, say, auto-load balancing and things like that, it's not going to scale. So at this point, I would look for experience in the team. If there is somebody in the team who has the confidence to write and maintain Chef, Ansible, or such things, I would choose that because it gives you control. And having control is better in a debugging situation. So I have had experiences where I had to understand why Elastic Beanstalk was bringing up instances very slowly. And it is impossible because Amazon does not publicly document what they actually do inside Elastic Beanstalk. The public API is very sparse, right? So you have to dig in inside the machine, try to look for scripts and do very hacky things because you do not have control. So I think the real question is how much control do you want? But at the same time, how much risk are you willing to take? Because with that control, you are saying, I need somebody who understands this code, who will maintain this code for me. So that's the trade-off, and that's a call that you need to take based on the resources you have available.
One stack kind of thing. Right. Do you have some idea about like if you're not a microservices like a architecture, right? And then you have to launch like different instances of different.
Right. So I have worked on a microservices project way back in 2013. So the interesting thing is back then we had people who wrote Puppet. I wrote Puppet at that time. And you can still do the VM approach, the snapshot approach by saying that, okay, if I want to do a microservice in Go, here is my Go stack, here is my Ruby stack, here is my Java stack, here is my C# stack. So you could have pre-baked AMIs or machine images for each stack that you want to deploy. There are community resources available in all these, like Chef, Ansible, Puppet. All of them have community cookbooks or recipes that let you bring up these stacks. So you could say that we'll write very little of our own code, we'll use as much as we can from the community and maintain that. I think that would be a fair balance of doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's a horses for courses. There's no like right answer here. All right, I think we're kind of running out of time. So I'll quickly summarize a few things that I wrote. Take these with a pinch of salt. They're a bit preachy. So the focus is on adding value. Who are we adding value for? The customer, right? And as developers, our focus should always be on the customer. Right? We should know why we are writing every line of code that we are writing. How do we focus on adding value? By removing friction. Right? My work should be a pleasure. I should not have to do boring stuff. I should not have to wait on people or wait for 1,000 approvals to come in and all that. Remove friction in the process. And use all these tools to remove the friction. That's the role of the tools. Like he said, the single-click deployment made his life much easier, right? And the deployment department had to go. By continuously learning, because the industry is evolving very rapidly. There is a new tool out there every day. Most likely, 99.9% your problem is already solved by somebody else. So first go and search and see whether there is an existing library, there is an existing tool, something that solves your problem for you. but learn about it, right? Understand it. Make the right choices. I think what we as engineers need to really understand is the value of trade-offs. Like what am I gaining and what am I losing at the same time? It's very easy to just take things from GitHub and stick them into your code, but is it maintained? Is the guy going to maintain it over time? You know, is it even well written? Take your time to do a little thinking before you adopt something. I think this is the most important. I think we all need to own what we produce. Right? If I'm a developer, I need to own it. And by that I mean that if there is a bug in production because of my code, I should really feel terrible about it. Really feel terrible. And that should make me not do it next time. Right? I think that's the most important thing to take on. Yeah, all said and done. I think DevOps is a very democratic movement. It's not like the Agile manifesto. There are 12 commandments of Agile, right? DevOps has no such thing. There are no commandments of DevOps. There is no special people who went to a special place and decided that this is what the DevOps philosophy is. No, it's what you like or it's what works for you. And that's why I personally really like this movement because it's a very on the ground, practitioner driven movement. You define it. You blog about what you are doing and 10 other people will start doing it. Or you read somebody's blog and start doing it yourself. Right? That's how DevOps has grown. It literally started on Twitter. It can't get more democratic than Twitter. So please write about what you are doing. Share. I hope to see some of you speaking here next time and sharing what you are doing and educating the rest of us. I'm sure we all have a lot to learn from each other. Let's keep that community spirit going. Right? Thank you.
Snaps are good. You can just